Hey, what's going on, everybody? Boilon here, and we're back again for another special video here with Gangsta KT back on the Boilon channel. How's everyone? Sorry, how are you doing? Not everyone. How's everyone else out there?
Hey, what's going on, Boylan? I am doing great. Glad to be back again, man. Thanks for having me. I'm pumped to talk about DD6 today. I'm guessing a lot of your audience probably has finalized these decisions, maybe is well on their way. But I think some people will still be very interested to hear what we do differently, what the best plan is now. So
Yeah, so
looking forward to that.
I just finished my second run of Dark Dimension 6, which is great. So now I have Big Scroll, but there's definitely been some characters that I was like, like I took in originally, especially on my first run, that, they were okay, but they weren't really that great. And so I want to talk about some of the characters that I did, see if you had any like mine or different from mine, and maybe help some people out there to avoid some things in the future as far as the characters that they bring in. So let's compare. So if you're ready to go,
Sounds
everybody,
great.
let's boil this down. Ooh, okay, so we're going to start here, obviously, at the global lane. Now, of course, in Dark Dimension 7, in the future, when that comes out, that's going to be different. Apparently, that's City up front first, so that's going to be a little bit interesting rather than City at the back. But since we're not there yet, we're going to start with global, make our way through Cosmic, into City, into Legendary, and I don't expect much complaints about the Legendary side, but we'll see if you ended up doing something different. So, what was your global picks? Your first five? Let's talk about your first five.
Yeah, so for global, I did looks fairly similar, but Apocalypse.
Yeah.
I think that's the obvious one. I did have him ready. I did Black Widow,
Okay.
cheap,
Yeah.
added some utility fast.
Yeah.
I did Quicksilver. I've been
Hmm.
a huge fan and bullish on Quicksilver. I know he was fairly expensive, but loved his utility outside of DD6
Yeah.
as well. Was helpful in there. I did Titania, just as another
Ah, okay.
cheap pick.
Yep.
You
I
know,
mine's
using
pretty far down here actually. She's way down here for me. So I did not. But yeah, I do know a lot of people that did decide to do that, especially because she was bio. So I guess, trying to find a bio character. So I'm assuming you didn't do cap because I did cap, so that's probably what I did with my bio.
Exactly. So I was torn between the two. She was one piece cheaper, and deciding that, like right as I'd kind of decided I need to get scroll ASAP. So that
Mhm.
got me there faster. Loved her extra damage in Crucible.
Mhm.
Sometimes that's just the Kang show, but where it's not, that extra power on her has been really helpful outside of DD6.
Yeah.
But mainly, like you said, she's bio, she's cheap,
So that was
and
your
I was
fourth
using her a lot.
that was your fourth character. So who was your fifth character for that?
Yeah, so fifth was a little bit of a stretch. Same reason she was cheap. I
Oh,
did Lady Deathstrike.
oh, okay.
Um,
So you're not you're the second person who's told me that, at least publicly. So I knew I have another friend who actually did Lady Deathstrike, and I was very skeptical. I was like, "What? Come on!" Like because she's really old. I understand why you did it, and I hope your Weapon X team is pretty big then, like to make some value out of it. You're still using them a little bit and more.
Oh, in War, using them
Yeah.
all the time. I did
Okay.
Omega Red too, skipping ahead. But so
Yeah.
they're still incredible in War. The team with the speed they get at the start and with Omega Red, I've been getting good value out of Lady Deathstrike. Not sure if I do her today.
How many pieces is she want? Two pieces of
She was
tech.
two.
Okay,
Yep.
that's not too bad. And adamantium, honestly, like I have so many of this that it's a pretty easy, unique to use. So that's not too bad. So I get it from a cheap perspective. Did you get any value out of her like in the actual nodes or did she die? Because that's my concern is that her health is like pretty low now these days.
So more than I was expecting. And again, it's the Apocalypse show, right? In
Yeah.
global, and Quicksilver was definitely the second best out of who I took. But on my second run, where I had a few more choices, I found that she was actually better than Black Widow. At least for the team composition I had, I was getting a little more value out of her than Black Widow.
I mean, she has a really good special as far as the turn bar reduction, the 20% speed bar. I mean, it's a low cooldown as well, 3 cooldown. So this probably pops up fairly frequently. So especially in Dark Dimension where there's like so many clumped up enemies that really that's probably hitting like 5 people. So
Yeah. And does
that's
great damage in there too. Like her alt, if she does a kill, she does the extra attacks, which isn't that frequent in Dark Dimension, but a lot of good damage. I was impressed. Again, she's not the best by any means. She's one of the also rans, but she did better than I thought.
true. So what did you do on your timed run then for global? Who else did you bring in extra?
So on the time run, I did have Captain America by then.
Oh, okay.
Used him, and then right when I beat it the first time, I took up Weaver. Not as much for the timed
Mm,
run, but more just for the power in Crucible and how great she
okay.
is. So I did end up using Weaver in addition to Quicksilver on the timed run.
Okay. Did you get good value out of Spider Weaver? Because I've heard mixed things from other people who've done it in terms of like I don't know. Maybe her cooldowns are long actually because her ultimate's at 8. She does get. I mean, I guess she's getting hit, so she's getting ability energy. But yeah, I don't know. Some people were saying mixed things about her. So, what was your experience with that?
Yeah, again, I'd put her about with Quicksilver. I
Oh,
think
okay.
Apocalypse is definitely the separator, but then Quicksilver and
Yeah.
Weaver, I'd say separated from the rest. Captain America was not good without Peggy. So
Mm.
I found value T18ing him since then, no question, but quickly did not use him in those nodes.
Yeah, I definitely found more value, I think, of Cap with Black Widow, just because when he was chucking out his taunt, that he would give more ability energy to Black Widow as well, because there's extra Avenger allies too. But aside from that, my cheap pick was Gambit, and now, based on what we know about the Extreme X Men, now this feels pretty good. So he's
Yep.
already there, and I don't have to do anything, and he's sitting at 400k. I actually back in my first Diamond recommendations, I also recommended him for Diamond. So if you had that, then even better. So 400k Gambit, he was okay. So he was a cheap pick. Like I think his damage, like I wish there was like an internal damage calculator that like shows me on the side of the screen how much damage my characters are doing over a battle, because it didn't feel like he was doing that much, but maybe he was, like, in fact, with the passive. And I don't know over the course of the battle how much damage that did, but it probably did, and I just wasn't looking at it. But yeah, I just felt like in terms of the turns he was taking, like once you chucked out the ability block, like I felt like he wasn't really doing a ton, and then most of the damage was coming from his passive.
Yeah,
So
which
it was
you're getting
okay.
attacked a lot, to your
Yeah.
point.
I did do Doctor Doom on my first run, and this was huge. I actually thought this was
Nice.
huge. And now, in retrospect, now that we know that he's going to be a mythic character for Dark Dimension 7, this already feels good because he's already done at tier 18. So this is something that people are going to most likely have to do anyways for Dark Dimension 7 with the mythic stuff, because there's like kind of right now like 5 major characters, and I think Doom is still in there. And again, kind of time platforming for Apocalypse, but that was a lot of extra turns that he got that just spread out all that damage. And I think this really helped me clear global faster. And the mix of Tech and Mystic gear, I think, was actually good because it was easy to sort of get him up because it was a mix of both. But the miasma
Yeah.
obviously kind of sucked for future characters like Ghost Rider, and I was still kind of like, I did have enough, but like it was tight, right, with the miasma. So you have to be careful about that.
Yeah,
So
and those good predictability there, Boilon, because I think those two now are somewhat no brainers for global. Like if I were doing this today, and we
yeah.
didn't know that when you did it, so
So my first
nice.
5 were Apocalypse, Black Widow, Gambit, Cap, and Doom. And then in my second run, I brought in Quicksilver. So that's about it. I had the 6 characters. It was kind of weird doing my time run because I had to decide like between Black Widow and Cap, and I didn't use both of them in the same run, or was it? No, I kept Gambit in for most of my runs. I think it was Black Widow and Cap, and then if I wanted to do some coring for a second attempt, I would just bring the other character in. So I only had to spend 200 cores rather than 250, and that's kind of, I only have the 6 characters. I haven't upgraded Weaver yet, mostly because I want to upgrade Dormammu still towards Dark Dimension 7, so I don't want to spend the Mystic gear right now. But I do understand the Crucible pushing because a lot of people are pushing quite hard on that, and she's probably still used there as well. So
Yep,
uh,
and that T18 on her made a big difference in Crucible. Like that match against Darkhold Quicksilver that's so common in Room 3 now,
mhm.
it is so much easier with her being at T18. It's automatic.
Quicksilver was amazing. I think he made a huge difference coming in on my second run. So obviously, if I'd had him in my first run, I probably still would have kept you, but I probably would have got rid of Black Widow and Cap, and then used Quicksilver and Doom and things like that instead. I think Gambit might still be the better pick out of all 3 of these standalone, I think, in my opinion, and especially now with the news about Extreme X-Men, you kind of want to do that. I don't know if you need to bring Black Widow and Cap up now based on the fact that, Rebirth is kind of is sliding out, right? So
I'd agree.
you don't need to bring them up that big anymore, in my opinion.
Yeah, especially when we get a new bio raid team down the road, I think the value of Cap's going to be way down at that point.
Is there anyone
Um,
else like down here that you would, I don't know, or do you think like between both of ours that that's probably kind of the better picks at this point, whether it's for cheap
yeah,
or for actual reasons to bring up, to 95?
yeah. So I'll say with T18 gear becoming more available now, and that'll probably continue fairly quickly. I think you do want to bring the better characters that you're using elsewhere versus the Titanias versus the
Mm,
Lady Death
mm,
Strikes. But one really interesting thing I heard, one of my Alliance buddies recently went through this by doing the 4 Pegasus in
mm.
Weaver.
Oh,
So he'd
really?
taken some time off the game. He didn't
Okay.
have some of these other characters as big and focused on the new tunes. And he said that he actually two-shot the first node and one-shot the second and third global node without
Really?
Apocalypse with the
Without
4 Pegasus
Apocalypse.
members. Yes, with
Okay.
the 4 Pegasus and Weaver. So,
Wow.
um,
It's a lot of tech
hadn't
gear,
hadn't
though.
seen
That's a
that
lot of tech
before.
gear.
It is a lot of tech gear, and I know he had it, but he's loving them outside of the mode
Interesting.
too. So, don't know if that's good or not, but wanted to mention it because
Yeah.
it sounded like it worked well there.
That's interesting. Thanks for bringing that up because I think that I personally don't have Pegasus that big. I basically have them big enough to use in the raids, which is about like for me it's about 1.2 million, 1.25 for my simming. Like I'm beating the Sims, so I don't personally need them higher than that. Also with the star levels for the new characters, like they're somewhere down here for me. So actually, I have decent star levels on them now. But yeah, I didn't put too much gold into it for the purposes of Dark Dimension. But I could definitely see that if it worked out for him, then. And it didn't take too long. Hopefully, like too long, then that sounds good. But then he's gonna have less tech for city, and we're gonna get to talk about good city picks, and I think and legendary and stuff where there's some pretty good tech stuff in there.
Agreed.
So I think that's it for global. I'm trying to find my button there. There we go. So cosmic. Let's move on to there. So many traits on the side now. And so the top. We'll start with yours again. So where do you have some of mine? Probably.
And I'll say congrats on your big scroll there
Yeah,
officially.
yep,
That's
yep,
great to see.
maxed out.
So yeah, very similar, and I think Cosmic is I'd pretty much do the same today, maybe with one or two tweaks. But
Mhm.
so for Cosmic, I used Vol, Photon, Kestrel, Kang, and then I used Star Lord Annihilation on my first run, and then
Okay.
Mini Scroll on my second run.
Star Lord Annihilation. Yeah, I did not do that. Oh right. He's with the rest of my nowhere at level 1. So this is commonly known for you who follow my channel that I didn't build into nowhere. They're right at the bottom here. All of them right now. So that's where I managed to save some gold at least. But we're not this is not the nowhere video. I have plenty of those videos up on my channel. But yeah, I think a lot of people did it because he's skill, right? And so there was the availability of skill gear, especially if you decided not to do Nick Fury. We'll talk about that if you I don't know if you did or not, but
I have since. I did not forward DD6, and then
okay.
Star Lord's very cheap too. Kind of same dynamic. He just got me in more quickly.
Yeah.
He had some heal blocks that helped at certain points, like when there was the Red Hulk and Apocalypse at the same time on the last node. I remember some of his things helping a little there,
Mhm.
but it was mainly those other four, and they're so valuable outside of this too. I think they're pretty obvious.
Now I did Sylvie, and this is one of my regrets because she wasn't that expensive, but I thought that because she had the Dark Dimension text, honestly, I thought maybe it's in her ultimate actually. In raids or Dark Dimension, reduced speed bar, and then this made it sound like you wanted to bring in like all the Bifrost to Cosmic Dark Dimension, and this kind of gave me the impression that she was going to be a lot better. That being said, her cooldown her alt's so big, like it's honestly
Yeah,
it takes forever to get back around. Like you're lucky to get it more than once per node even with deaths. Like it just was not that good. Her special was okay, but I mean it's still pretty high cooldown, 6 for a special. But it had a stun, which was really nice. So I did like that and some offense downs. Typically, I would say for Dark Dimension, like you really want kind of controlling type characters that can put debuffs, control the field. Slow is really good as well. Things like that, so you can take more turns, which is nice for the 1 turn slow. Would have been better if it was 2 turn slow,
yeah,
but yeah, just such long cooldowns, and you can't get it back because, like with the Vol exposed, you get the energy in raids, but you don't get it for the team outside of raids. It's just for her. So the Vol's exposed is good, just not so good outside of raids, and so this was a small regret of mine that I could have put into someone else. I probably would have honestly. I should have waited and honestly just taken Dormammu because some people did do that in their first run and take Dormammu because the revive once I think would have made a huge difference on surviving longer. And he puts a lot of debuffs out. He's a really good character. He can heal the team as well, with his ultimate. So probably would have kept me alive a lot longer and a lot more value than and even the AoE basic, like that's like pretty big damage too, honestly. And the fact that he drains on that so he can keep himself alive, I think that I should have just waited and done this. It's a lot of miasma though, unfortunately, because I did Doom first. So that's I would have traded for Dorm. I would actually say at this point now, it might be worth waiting for Dorm because you're going to need him for Dark Dimension 7, which means you're probably going to need to take him to 18 anyways.
I would completely agree. I think right now, with hindsight being 2020, I think Dorm is the play, and he's going to make the node easier, right? Like I agree, but those nodes were fairly easy for me overall with the Kang, Kestrel, Vol. Those are great characters, and then
Mhm.
especially when you get Baby Scroll. But I think one thing, if you had done Dorm, we probably wouldn't be looking at a big scroll on your roster right now. It might be a
Maybe.
couple more days or a week or two, so that helps.
Yep.
And then also, part of Sylvie at the time when you made that decision, there was probably that Bifrost and Cosmic Crucible node.
It
And so
was.
I
It
could
was
see there
actually. That's
being a
right.
lot of value from that investment. But with that being gone, probably not one I'd do today. I'd
Yeah,
agree.
you're right. It's actually definitely something I did back then when Cosmic Cruise the room was huge. They were very hard to beat still, and a lot of it came down to whether or not you could kill Sylvie and or
Yeah.
Vol. In that first round, and I think this actually did get me a few wins at the time. So definitely something I did in the moment, and not something that I personally recommend now. As far as alternative picks, because you mentioned Star Lord Annihilation, would you still do that now? Or are there other characters that you would have done? Let's say my Sylvie and your Star Lord Annihilation, if we had to pick another character, from this list, who would that be?
Yeah, so I would say, after watching your 12th video on how horrible Nowhere are, I think I've come to terms I probably would not do Star Wars Annihilation now. And kidding, I was huge on Nowhere when they came out. I was a little short-sighted there. I agree more with your recent sentiment, although they are still good and more. But I
Yeah.
agree with what you said. I do Dorm now because of the Mythic for DD7. So
Yeah.
it's going to be tough on that miasma gear, but I think he's looking good for DD7 too. So.
And this is another point I just make throughout a lot of my videos is that really people should be making sure they buy uniques as much as they can, whether it's in the store, the event stores, wherever you can find them. Like, make sure you stock up on this stuff because you never know when you're going to need a lot of it. So, whether it's miasma or a different unique, keep a lot of them because you never know when a new character is going to come out, and or a few characters that happen to have the same unique or reworks, right? All those things. So another reason to stock up on these things.
Yeah, they brought out on new teams where, two people on the new team will have the same one, and at T18, that's like 120 of those
Yeah.
pieces or 130. That you don't get that overnight. So
Especially for Dark Dimension, and that's like the biggest concern when it comes to Dark Dimension is who you're using your uniques on because you're not going to have enough for multiple characters. Typically, you're not going to have enough for multiple characters. We'll talk about that when we get to City a little bit as well. So I think, yeah, I mean, there's some solid picks here, but I'm still a believer of taking a character that's going to have greater value beyond just Dark Dimension if you can. But that's
yep,
just me.
especially when the gear's a little more available. I think that
Yeah.
makes that trade-off easier.
I think there's a big difference between trying to do it within, the first 1% of players and then like once that's kind of done and then the gear kind of opens up a little bit. I think that's especially when you should start considering characters that have more value instead of the rushing it.
You nailed it.
Let's move on to City. And this one might have a lot more now than there was before. So we'll talk first about our character picks, and I'll go first this time. Now, I went with a more Sinister Six approach. Now, yes, I did Swarm. That seems to be a joke with us. We're going to talk about Swarm again. And I did this amid Infestation. But I do want to say that if you use Swarm, I would not do this now. I'm gonna say this now, and I said this in other videos. I wouldn't do this for anyone else now. This was a very Boilon pick. I'm not saying I recommend Swarm, but I am saying I did get some good value out of it for upgrading him because of his AoE bleeds on his ultimate with Ghost Rider Robbie. Honestly, using the ult was like a free turn for Ghost Rider. So very good synergy there, but don't do it now. Like it was a very in the moment kind of me kind of thing. Just pointing that out there for everyone else. So we had Ghost Rider, Swarm, Vulture, again, Sinister Six, Miss Marvel Hardlight, and Spider Man 2099. So those were my 5 picks. What were your 5 picks?
Yeah, so I'm pulling up my phone here to make sure I remember this correctly, but very, very similar, I think. So Kamala, Miss Marvel, and Robbie, those
Yeah.
two I think are still no brainers. And when they came out, they weren't out when it first came, but by the time I was getting there, I was able to do those, and it was the Robbie show.
Mm.
I did do 2099. I did Firestar,
Yeah, that was.
who
Yep. Where's my.
who I was
Oh, that's up there.
really happy with in there, and kind of similar to like you said, just all those extra bleeds just really
Mm.
fueled Robbie. And then I also did Ronin.
Okay.
which a big part of that was the upcoming trial. That's context that gets lost over time, but knowing they'd be big for that trial and then also just for war. He
Yeah.
wasn't great in there. It was still the Robbie show, but he was a nice compliment. He gets more bleeds out, kind of the same story. Has a stun on a long cooldown.
He has a lot of single target though, right? So it's not as much AoE damage or anything like that. Is he
Yeah, his ult is single target with a blind. His
uh
special is a chain that puts out a lot of bleeds. That one's pretty
okay.
good.
Yeah. So
Um,
that sounds like a replacement to like my swarm in some ways in terms of just putting bleeds out everywhere. But as far as other debuffs go, like he doesn't really it's mostly just damage and like a stun, right? Like it's a lot of bleeds more or less, and that's
yeah,
about it.
and I'll say if someone's really into war, I think they're going to be a war meta team for a long, long time. I mean, they're just amazing. So I think he's still worth considering, but it's not for DD6 itself.
So
And again, a big part of that for me was the trial that's no longer really in play.
So what's interesting, and I want to raise this with Ghost Rider, is that I'm not sure if he's going to make it to Dark Dimension 7. And I know this is not a 7 video, but because he has miasma and the aforementioned, Doom and Dormammu, who require that as well, this would make a third character in that group of 25 that requires the same unique. And I think that might be one too many. So what's
I'm
your
worried
thoughts
about
about
that.
that? He's a
I
great
think you might
character,
have touched on
but
that.
now they've introduced obviously a lot of other great choices, especially the Superior Six, right? And I think that's what I'm going to end up loading up with, and what I would probably recommend now for six too, for people who haven't made it yet. I got a lot of value out of Vulture. I thought Vulture was an amazing character. I actually thought that Craven was pretty good as well. But if you can stack the Superior Six together, because Vulture on his passive gets this thing where I think it's down here further. Gain, yeah, your square's blocking it, but gain 50% drain. And if this character has two or more Superior Six allies, the whole team gets 50% drain, and that part is huge. So you need him, basically Craven, and probably Lizard or Spider Slayer, one of the two. But I would probably recommend Lizard, even though I don't have him. I'd probably recommend Lizard, because he's the tank over Spider Slayer. But that's just my opinion there. And if you have that, then they can all get 50% drain, which is quite substantial, to keep themselves alive.
Huge.
Craven has some
Yep.
great debuffs as well. And my only issue with Miss Marvel Hardlight is I felt that after she used her cooldowns, I was kind of just punching, like with the basic. I don't know. It just felt like she was maybe kind of slow, or because she was tanking, she was getting a lot of debuffs and therefore didn't always take her turns. And like I felt after she used her abilities, like it just wasn't really doing anything. So
Yeah.
I'm not sure if I would do it again personally. I would still do Robbie for Dark Dimension 6. I don't know if I would do Hardlight though now. I wouldn't say she was a regret because the team is amazing. But as far as Dark Dimension goes, I don't know if I got a ton of value out of it.
Well, that's the thing, and you're exactly right. She's not. She mainly was just punching in there, and it didn't hurt very much. But it was for arena, right? Like
Yeah.
that. That's why you T18'd her, and then because you have her, you take her in there.
Yeah.
So she helped a little with survivability. I think right now, Secret Defenders are still so good. I probably would do her, but I completely agree with your city sentiment. And with Mythic, we're gonna have limited choices. I could see them tuning those nodes where Doom's almost mandatory, like having that
Mm,
pop and being able to pop Apocalypse is almost required or something like that.
yeah.
So I agree with your miasma concern. A new tier gear where we're going to be starting at 0,
Yeah.
and that's going to be tough to maybe bring in Robbie. But I would guess he'll probably still be the best character in there.
I think if I was doing this again, though, I would probably, yeah, I mean, Secret Avengers is a great team, like I said. So, it's up to the person if they want to still do Miss Marvel Hardlight or not. I would probably not do 2099. I would probably replace 2099 with another Superior 6 member at this point. I think that, I didn't do I did Craven on my second run because he wasn't out when I did my first run. But I would probably do Vulture, Craven, and I would add now, once they become available, one of these other Superior 6 members to activate Vulture's passive. And then I would do that rather than bringing him up again. That's something that I would do. Some people did big time. And I guess you didn't either. Some people did take him in, and he was apparently okay. And I'm still using him in the arena offense, but I don't think he really needs to be that high, and that's the only issue there. Is there anyone else that you either would have liked to bring in, or you think that is worth mentioning here, other than the characters we talked about already?
Not really. I'll just double down. I really agree with your city approach. I know jumping ahead a little bit, but
Yeah.
I think that also, for people building these tunes up, like right now for the first time, that pairs so well with some of the legendaries we'll talk about
Hmm.
too, and
Hmm.
having that great Sinister Six overall team. So I completely
Great.
agree. I think
Great.
that's
One
the route
one
to
of the
go right
best
now.
team one of the best teams lately, in my opinion, was the Sinister Six rework. I've had so much fun with that. So maybe I'm biased
Yeah,
when I'm talking all of this about Sinister Six. And I had so many videos out there about Sinister Six. But yeah, no, it's been a great rework and I really love the team. Do want to touch on this very, very quickly. So things may change because I'm recording this on the weekend that Carnage and Venom rumored to be a rework. I don't know if those two standalone right now would be enough to warrant putting them in there. Alien spores you're taken away from Super Scroll once you unlock them. That's a bit of a problem. We might have to talk about this in a later video at some other time. But all of the symbiotes were alien spores, and so this was if you remember right from Dark Dimension 2 or 3, like this was a big problem for City
oh yeah,
that you would have to maybe choose how many symbiotes you would take in because it was just all the same unique, and they're pretty expensive as well actually. So maybe that's a moot point. Apparently, Carnage is like 5 pieces, and
Ooh,
and Venom as well. Actually,
that's rough.
I want to double check that actually. So City over here, yeah. So Carnage is 5, and Venom's 5. Wow. So that's pretty much no, probably at that point. It's too many.
Especially on a new tier where we can't save up at all beforehand.
Yeah. Okay. So maybe not. So yeah, Superior 6 I think is a great way to go, and then of course some of the usual suspects, especially Ghost Rider and Miss Marvel. I think that's probably what I would recommend now. Is that's fair?
Yeah, I completely agree with you.
Where's my button? Oh yeah, okay. There we go. My camera's in the way. Let's move on to legendary, which will just lump together all the legendaries together at this point for the final 4 nodes. Yes, you can't use Apocalypse in the first node in the first section, but you can in the second one. So 5 characters. I did Omega Red, Nova, Green Goblin, Black Cat, and Doc Ock actually. So I waited a little bit to get Doc Ock in there because I think it made such a huge difference having Doc Ock with Green Goblin than just Green Goblin by himself. Now, you did it a bit earlier than me, so you probably didn't have access to Green Goblin, and you had to do someone
You're
else.
exactly right. Yep, had him on my second run. It was the small version, the 4 yellow star version before got the trial rewards, but he still was great in there, even at 4 yellow stars. But had heard about the Doc Ock rework by the time I planned on my first run, so did end up last second changing to taking him. I took Adam Warlock in
Oh,
here, who
okay,
is one of
okay,
my
all right,
also rans. Obviously Nova and Black Cat. And then Doc Ock, and then my fifth was Omega Red.
okay.
Um,
So, you did not do Nick Fury.
I have since, but I did not do
Oh,
them
okay.
for DD6.
Adam Warlock, interesting. Tell me more. What was your thoughts on that? Was it just using
Yeah,
Mystic gear or what?
it was. I was at the point, these are your final choices. I had the extra Mystic gear out of the Origins left, and Doc Ock taking that other gear. And so it was between him and Ma, and I just, even though I didn't really care, I'm not using Infinity Watch a ton. I thought he was the better choice of the two.
Yeah. I guess I'm lucky that I kind of did it when I did because I managed to get Green Goblin in my first 5 because I was patient and I was, what I didn't care about rushing it too much. I want again, getting good value in my choices. So I do know some people who did Adam Warlock, and I'm wondering if a lot of people who did that might have been before Green Goblin was officially out, and so therefore they kind of needed an extra character. I do want to say that as far as running it, like Nova, once I used my ultimate, I felt like his cooldowns are fairly high, and once again, I just feel like I was kind of waiting around and just pissing about with my basic until he got his, like he was okay, but I actually think he was like kind of almost borderline worse than Omega Red because Omega Red had more debuffs and things across the board. His ultimate, flips, but also does the speed bar reduction, all the slows, like tons of debuffs on Omega Red, which is great, and he's on lower cooldown actually. The alt is only 5, and the special is I think it's pretty low actually. It's 3. So 3 and 5, very very low cooldowns on Omega Red. So I actually felt really good about him. But the
Yeah,
Nova Ultimate was really nice. The battlefield effect, the Nova Force with Doc Ock because it gives deflex on players' turns and things like that. And so that
yeah.
synergized well with the Doc Ock Green Goblin combo for him. But outside of the alt, I don't know. I felt like because I eventually included once I got to the other nodes, right? Then I would have Apocalypse available, and then I would have the 6 characters. Did you do any of the Horsemen or no? Because I know some people did, but
So
for
so I,
this,
I was always obsessed with Red Hawk.
okay,
So I actually did Red Hawk as my very first T18, and probably wouldn't worry about taking them now for those nodes. but I don't regret it. I got so much value out of him in Crucible and War, like having all that extra power. He's not needed for DD6, but so again, wouldn't do him today, but actually don't regret it. I got a lot of value out of that, and then did bring him into those nodes too. You are correct about Omega Red. You mentioned it earlier, but the best tunes in this are ones that control. His slowing everyone on that ultimate like changes those matches. And I did find when I was incorporating Apocalypse that I actually was dropping Nova.
Mm.
To your point, like when I had Green Goblin and Doc Ock, Omega Red was making that cut and doing better for me on some of the final nodes.
And actually, for quite an old character, he's pretty beefy. Like his health is over 2 million when you max him out, and maybe part of that's because I have 7 red, but that's still pretty impressive given how old he is.
It
And
is.
so I think that his survivability is pretty good. I mean, I think Nova might be up there too. Yeah, but I mean, he's a newer character, so I expect that. But for an older character, over 2 million, I'm not even sure Doc Ock has that. Okay, maybe he does. It's about the same actually as Omega Red. So considering Doc Ock had a rework, that means Omega Red's health is pretty good. I don't know if the rest of his stats stand up, but regardless, but it's pretty good. I think for such an old character now at this point. I
Oh
think
yeah,
I think there
still
was a bit of
amazing and more.
I think there was a bit of mixed messaging regarding the horseman though, because the last two nodes, apocalypse, you could use the horseman, but it almost seemed like you kind of needed to, because I know that some people did raise. I think Morgan Le Fay and Red Hulk were the two common ones that people did build up because they maybe felt
Yep.
that they needed to, maybe because of the controlling, the different debuffs that they put down. I don't know, whatever. Maybe the people who did it early on did this, and maybe not people now, because I don't think you need to do this now. When I did my second run, if you have Green Goblin available to you, I would personally recommend trying to do both Doc Ock and Green Goblin, because GG standalone, in my opinion, is not as good. But the two combined together, because then you get the Shocker summon, which then gets the 2 Superior 6 text available, and his ultimate, reduces the speed bar. And that's huge because you're reducing speed bar across the board pretty much with Shocker, and that one is really good for me.
Yeah, Shocker's amazing in there. There's no question. But what you said is exactly right. And I think when DD6 first came out, might have even been before Black Cat, like the
Yeah.
very first people doing this planning and beating it. So, if you're comparing, hey, do I want to take a Red Hawk to a Shuri? Like that's a pretty
Yeah.
big upgrade. And I remember people saying when it first came out, they thought those horsemen may be needed on the last two nodes to keep it from taking 30 attempts. But as Black Cat comes out, especially as Doc Ock and Goblin are there, that's not as important. I would not do them today, just for DD6.
Well, I think what that really shows is that it almost pays to be a little patient. Like you don't need to rush through, because you might make some choices that, yes, in the short term, I guess that's the conversation, right? Short term benefits versus long term benefits, And I feel that if you're rushing it, you are going to make these short term choices where you're not going to get a ton of value maybe out of some of these upgrades, but it's going to help you get Super Scroll, but you're going to have all these G18 characters that maybe you're not using, and I guess that's what I don't want to do. And so I was really happy with when I cleared it. I think I was in the top 1% still. I was just under 3,000, or the top 3,000 players to get scroll, and I'm okay with that. And I'm more or less happy with my choices. There's a few questionable ones that I did that like I wouldn't do now, but I think that's the thing about Dark Dimension, is that as more characters come out, characters get reworked, that there's always going to be better choices, and why you kind of need to update lists at least every 3 months, I think, to kind of reflect that.
Yeah, absolutely. Hindsight's 2020, right? Things change. You want to focus on the new characters, but that is different. Like we mentioned it with your Sylvie choice. It doesn't mean it
Yeah.
was wrong at the time.
No.
Probably
Yeah.
helped you a lot in Crucible, but might be wrong today. So I think this was a good summary. The five legendaries you showed, I think, are no brainers right now for which ones to take.
Overall, I would say I'm pretty happy with my roster for the most part. Like I haven't made any huge mistakes or regrets personally. But yeah, Dark Dimension is one of those things where, and what I'm afraid of too for Dark Dimension 7 is that some people might continue to take characters that they don't want to, because it's kind of like a sunk cost investment. That's what happens with Dark Dimension, is that sometimes I didn't mention it in here, but we mentioned before the video that I raised Punisher into Dark Dimension 2, 3, and maybe 4. I don't know. He'd be way down there now. But because he was so cheap to build, that, maybe some characters will continue on the Dark Dimension track just because people have already invested into G18. So like, okay, what's one more gear tier, especially if they're cheap to build, rather than choosing new characters from scratch that are better.
Yeah,
So I guess we'll
that's
see.
a little short-sighted normally, but yeah, we will see.
Yeah, like Gambit, for example. He's a cheap global mutant character. Am I going to take him into G19 for Dark Dimension 7? I'm assuming G19. They haven't actually said the requirements yet, but I'm just assuming that that's what it's going to be. Am I going to still take Gambit because he's cheap? I don't know. We'll see, I guess, in whenever that comes out. But some decisions that we'll have to think about.
I think he's a good bet right now with the rework. But yeah, it's the G19 is definitely a different dynamic than what having the third level of teal gear is.
Mhm.
It's just all brand new, so it's a different resource availability. You got to
Uh,
be much more deliberate.
and obviously Super Scroll is really important. It's just, you have to balance that out with some of the choices that you make for your characters and how good you feel about it at the end of it. So now that I think about 1% or more, I think the last time I heard in my Discord was about 4,000 people, maybe, or just under 4,000 people have gotten Super Scroll. So that might give you an idea, or the audience an idea of sort of how many people have them now as well.
Well, I'm sure that'll increase quickly. It's definitely getting more available, which is good. It's that time.
Any final comments about that? Are we feeling pretty good about what we talked about?
Yeah, I think that's a great update to the list there. Hopefully, again, help some people who are making those decisions now. And just one last congrats on your Super Scroll. Crucible is going to be a lot different for you
Yeah,
now.
it is too, especially when I fight against the people who put scroll on defense. God, I hate those people. So but yeah, no. Thanks for coming on the show today, and of course, as always, I'll have Gangsta KT's links in the description down below. Feel free to support him and go click on his channel, take a look at his content, and hit the subscribe button for him. I'm sure he'd greatly appreciate that as well. And thank you for coming on once again and having a chat with me.
Yeah, it's been fun, man. Always appreciate catching up and talking through theory of the game. And hope you enjoy the rest of your day.
And of course, until next time, everyone, stay safe and healthy, and I'll see you all later.
Take
Boilon
care.
signing out.